Jack Morley stood at the window of his 25th floor office, overlooking the dense skyline of New York City. The sun reflected off the towering buildings, casting long shadows on the streets below. It had been a long week, an exhausting one. He was ready to call it a day when his phone buzzed. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Morley, there's a visitor here to see you. A Mr. Marcus Layton. He doesn't have an appointment but insists it's urgent." Jack's brow furrowed. The name didn't ring a bell. "Marcus Layton," he repeated, rolling the name over his tongue. "Yes, sir. Should I tell him to come back another time?" Jack sighed and glanced at the pile of case files on his desk. He didn't need another distraction. But something about the name tugged at his curiosity. "Send him in," Jack said, turning away from the window. He straightened his tie, smoothed his suit, and waited. The door creaked open, and in walked a man who could easily be mistaken for any other white-collar executive. He was well-dressed but not flashy, his expression calm but with a hint of desperation in his eyes. Jack observed him closely, a habit he had developed after years of defending some of the city's most notorious criminals. "Mr. Morley," the man began, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Jack took the handshake, his grip firm but cautious. "Marcus Layton, is it? I wasn't expecting you." "No, you weren't," Marcus admitted, sitting down without being invited. "But you're the only one who can help me." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the man's directness. "Help you with what, exactly?" Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the room were bugged. "They've set me up. I'm being accused of laundering millions of dollars through offshore accounts. But I didn't do it. I'm being framed." Jack had heard this story before. Every criminal swore they were innocent. "Who's they?" Jack asked, leaning back in his chair. Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting around the room before settling back on Jack. "People with influence. People you don't cross." "People like who?" Jack pressed. Marcus hesitated again, and Jack could see the man weighing his options. "Look," Marcus finally said, "I can't give you names. Not yet. But I have proof. Enough to clear my name and expose the real criminals. But I need your help to do it." Jack studied the man. Marcus didn't seem like the typical desperate criminal trying to save himself. He looked like someone who was truly caught in a web of something much larger. Jack tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. He didn't trust Marcus, but the potential for a high-profile case with influential figures intrigued him. It could be career-defining. "Let me get this straight," Jack said. "You're accused of laundering millions of dollars, and you want me to defend you based on the claim that there's a conspiracy against you? And you don't want to tell me who's behind it?" Marcus nodded. "That's right. At least, not yet. I need to know you're in." Jack stood up, walking around his desk to stand directly in front of Marcus. "You've got my attention, Mr. Layton. But I don't take cases on blind trust. You'll need to show me something concrete if you want me to put my name on the line for you." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a flash drive. He held it out to Jack. "This is just the beginning. It's enough to prove my innocence. But it's also dangerous. If the wrong people find out you have this, we're both dead." Jack took the drive, feeling the weight of the decision in his hand. He could walk away. He could hand it over to the authorities and let them deal with it. But something about Marcus's fear, his palpable tension, kept Jack from dismissing him. "I'll take a look," Jack said, slipping the flash drive into his pocket. "But if you're lying, if this is some elaborate game, I'll make sure you pay for wasting my time." Marcus stood, visibly relieved. "You won't regret this, Mr. Morley. But be careful. They're watching me, and now that you're involved, they'll be watching you too." Jack watched Marcus leave, the tension in the room lingering even after the door closed behind him. Alone again, Jack pulled out the flash drive and stared at it. There was something in Marcus's voice, something beyond desperation. Fear. Real fear. The phone buzzed again. Jack ignored it, his mind already racing with questions. He knew one thing for sure, this wasn't going to be just another case. And he wasn't even sure who was the bigger threat, his new client or the invisible forces closing in on them both. That night, Jack sat in his study at home, the flash drive lying untouched on his desk. He poured himself a drink, letting the whiskey burn down his throat as he stared at it. He couldn't shake Marcus Layton's voice from his head. "They're watching me. And now they'll be watching you." Jack's instincts told him to drop the case. Walk away. But the allure of uncovering something bigger, something dangerous, was too strong to ignore. After a long pause, he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered, and a series of encrypted files appeared. Jack had dealt with complex financial documents before, but these were unlike anything he had seen. Offshore accounts, shell companies, money flowing through various jurisdictions. Names were redacted, but the numbers were staggering, millions of dollars moving through the system without a trace. He clicked on a file labeled Key Transfers and found detailed transactions, but again, no names. Whoever had orchestrated this scheme had done so with precision. It was professional, deliberate. And it wasn't just Marcus's name that was missing. It was everyone's. The real power behind this operation had been carefully scrubbed from the records. Jack scrolled through the data, his mind racing. There was enough here to cause real damage to someone, if only he could figure out who. Suddenly, a notification popped up on his screen. An external attempt to access his computer. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He yanked the flash drive out and shut the laptop. He sat back in his chair, his pulse racing. Marcus was right. Someone was watching. The next morning, Jack headed to the courthouse, feeling uneasy. He had a few regular cases on the docket that day, but his mind was on Marcus Layton and the files he had seen. As he walked through the grand halls, he spotted an old colleague, Danielle Larkin, now a prosecutor with a reputation for going after high-profile cases. "Morley," she called out, catching up to him. "I hear you've taken on Marcus Layton's case." Jack kept his expression neutral. News travels fast. Danielle crossed her arms, her sharp eyes studying him. "Be careful with that one. Marcus isn't your typical defendant. He's got connections, and not the good kind." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Connections like who?" She hesitated, her voice lowering. "Word is, Marcus was involved in some serious financial schemes. People with a lot to lose. You don't want to get caught in the crossfire." Jack smirked. "Since when do you care about my well-being?" Danielle shrugged. "I don't. But I've seen careers go up in flames over cases like this. Just a friendly warning." "Duly noted," Jack said, turning to leave. But her words lingered in his mind. Danielle wasn't one to give advice without a reason. And if she was worried about him getting too close to Marcus, that meant something was definitely off. That afternoon, Jack met Marcus at the prison again. He sat across from him, the dull hum of the prison's fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the room. "I looked at the files," Jack said, leaning forward. "This is bigger than I thought. Whoever's behind this, they're professionals." Marcus nodded, his face grim. "I told you. I'm being framed. They used me to move their money, and now they're pinning it all on me." Jack tapped his fingers on the table. "You need to give me more than that. Who are they? If I'm going to build a defense, I need names." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room. "There's a man, Jameson Reed. He's a corporate lawyer, but that's just a front. He's the one pulling the strings." Jack's stomach dropped. He knew the name. Reed was a high-powered attorney with deep connections in both the business world and the government. He was untouchable, or so everyone thought. "Reed's been laundering money through various shell companies for years," Marcus continued. "I worked for him on the lower level, handling small transactions. But when I found out what was really going on, I tried to walk away. That's when they set me up." Jack stared at Marcus, the pieces slowly coming together. If what Marcus said was true, Reed wasn't just laundering money, he was orchestrating a massive conspiracy involving corporate fraud, political corruption, and who knows what else. "You're saying Reed is behind all of this? That he's the one who set you up?" Marcus nodded. "He has connections everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if half the people in this prison are here because of him." Jack leaned back, absorbing the information. If Reed really was involved, this case was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. But there was something about Marcus's story that still didn't sit right. Reed was powerful, yes, but would he really take the risk of framing someone as insignificant as Marcus? "I'm going to need proof," Jack said finally. "Something concrete that links Reed to this operation." Marcus's eyes flickered with desperation. "I've already given you what I have. The rest, you'll have to find yourself. But you're not safe, Jack. If Reed knows you're digging, he'll come after you too." Jack stood, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had taken on dangerous cases before, but this felt different. This felt like stepping into the crosshairs of a powerful enemy. And once he was in, there would be no way out. As he left the prison, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the crowd, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the sense of unease followed him like a shadow. Back at his office, Jack sat at his desk, staring at the pile of case files. But his mind wasn't on the cases. It was on Marcus. And Jameson Reed. And the dark web of corruption he had just stepped into. For the first time in years, Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming. But there was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a blur of unease. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were always on him. At home, at work, even in the courtroom, he constantly scanned his surroundings, waiting for something, anything, to happen. but nothing did. Not yet. It was Friday afternoon when the first real crack in Marcus's story appeared. Jack had been combing through financial records, trying to connect the dots between Marcus and Jameson Reed, but the trail was frustratingly cold. He was deep into the documents when his phone rang. "Morley," he answered, distracted. "Mr. Morley, this is Sarah Reynolds, Marcus Layton's ex-girlfriend. I think we need to talk." Jack straightened in his chair. "Ex-girlfriend? Why didn't you come forward before?" There was a pause on the other end. "Because I'm not supposed to exist," she said quietly. "Not officially, anyway. Marcus kept our relationship a secret, but I know things. Things that might change how you see all of this." Jack's pulse quickened. "Meet me at my office. 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, Sarah Reynolds sat across from him, her demeanor tense but composed. She was in her early 30s, polished, with the look of someone used to navigating dangerous situations. Jack got right to the point. "Why contact me now, Sarah? What do you know about Marcus and the accusations against him?" Sarah glanced at the door before speaking, her voice low. "Marcus wasn't just a pawn, Jack. He knew exactly what he was involved in. He wasn't being framed. He was actively laundering money for Jameson Reed, and he did it for years." Jack's chest tightened. "That's not what he told me." Sarah scoffed. "Of course not. Marcus is a liar. He only started playing the victim when he realized things were falling apart and Reed was cutting him loose. He's trying to save himself by dragging others down." Jack frowned, trying to process the information. If Sarah was telling the truth, Marcus had manipulated him from the start. "Why are you telling me this?" She shifted in her seat. "Because I need protection. Marcus doesn't know I'm here, but if he finds out I talked to you, I'll be the next body in the morgue. He's desperate, Jack. Desperate people do dangerous things." Jack felt a chill run through him. He thought back to the files, the missing pieces of the puzzle. Marcus had played the role of a terrified victim perfectly, but Sarah's story fit too neatly with the gaps in Marcus's version. "Do you have proof of what you're saying?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the tension. "I do," she replied, pulling a small envelope from her purse. "This is a bank statement from an offshore account Marcus controlled. It shows transactions he made on Reed's behalf, millions of dollars moved through shell companies. It's all there." Jack took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in his hand. If what Sarah was saying was true, Marcus wasn't just an innocent man caught in a web of corruption, he was an active participant. And worse, he had lied to Jack from the start. Sarah stood up, pulling her coat around her shoulders. "I've done my part. Now it's up to you to figure out how deep this goes." Jack watched her leave, his mind racing. He had just uncovered the first major betrayal, but it wouldn't be the last. He sat there, staring at the bank statement, the truth starting to reveal itself. Marcus was in much deeper than he let on, and Jack had been dragged into the middle of it. That evening, as Jack sifted through the new evidence, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Morley," he answered, still distracted by the files. "You've been digging too deep, Jack." The voice was low, almost robotic. Jack froze, the tension in his muscles immediately rising. "Who is this?" "You don't need to know. But you do need to stop. Walk away from the Layton case before it's too late." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't respond well to threats." The voice chuckled darkly. "This isn't a threat. It's advice. We'll be watching. Make the right choice." The line went dead, and Jack stood there in silence, his mind buzzing. He knew this moment was coming, but the reality of it hit harder than he expected. Whoever was behind this wasn't just content with Marcus's downfall, they were watching Jack closely, ready to take him down too if necessary. Jack shoved the phone into his pocket and glanced out the window. The city lights twinkled below, but the beauty of the skyline felt cold, distant. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was walking a dangerous line, with no way to see the enemy approaching. The next morning, Jack returned to his office earlier than usual. He needed to regroup. There was more at play here than just Marcus and Jameson Reed. Sarah's information confirmed that Marcus was deeply involved, but there was still a nagging sense that the pieces didn't fully fit together. Midway through his coffee, his assistant knocked and poked her head in. "Mr. Morley, there's someone here to see you." "Who is it?" "She says her name is Angela Hayes. She's connected to the Layton case." Jack's gut twisted. Another unexpected visitor? He glanced at his watch. It was too early for this. But with everything unraveling so quickly, he couldn't afford to ignore potential leads. "Send her in," he said. Angela Hayes entered the office cautiously, her eyes darting around as if she expected danger in every corner. She sat down, clutching her bag tightly on her lap. There was a nervousness about her that set Jack on edge. "What can I do for you, Ms. Hayes?" Jack asked, trying to hide his impatience. "I worked for Jameson Reed," she said in a rush. "I was his executive assistant. I know things. Things that could put him away for a long time. But I'm not safe." Jack sat forward. "You worked for Reed? And you have evidence against him?" Angela nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything. Financial records, correspondence, it proves everything Marcus said about Reed." Jack took the drive from her, his mind racing. This was exactly what he needed to confirm Marcus's story, or to expose the entire web of lies. But before he could respond, the door burst open. His assistant screamed, and in the doorway stood two men, dressed in dark suits, their faces hard, their eyes cold. "We need to talk, Morley," one of them said, stepping inside, his hand casually resting on the inside of his jacket, where Jack could only assume a gun was hidden. Jack's heart raced. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was survival. Jack's eyes darted between the two men as they stepped fully into the office, their presence imposing. His mind raced through possibilities, calculating each move, every potential outcome. He could feel Angela Hayes trembling beside him, her breath quickening. One of the men, taller with a clean-shaven head, spoke first. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Morley. We know what you've been digging into." Jack remained seated, his heart pounding but his face calm. "You burst into my office to tell me that? You could have just called." The bald man smiled coldly, taking a step closer. "This isn't about a friendly chat. We're here to give you one last chance. Drop the case. Walk away. Or we'll make sure you regret it." Jack's instinct screamed to stay quiet, but he had never been one to back down, even in the face of threats. He slowly leaned back in his chair, trying to exude the confidence he didn't feel. "And if I don't?" The second man, who hadn't spoken yet, pulled back his jacket just enough to reveal the gun holstered at his side. "We won't need to explain it a second time." Jack's pulse quickened, but he kept his gaze steady. "You're not going to do anything here. Not in broad daylight. You're trying to intimidate me. It's not going to work." The bald man's smile widened. "You're a smart guy, Morley. But don't mistake our restraint for weakness. You don't know who you're dealing with." Jack stared them down, forcing himself to hold his ground. "You've made your point. Now get out of my office." The two men exchanged a glance, clearly unamused by Jack's defiance. But after a tense moment, they turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, the bald man stopped and glanced back. "This was your final warning." The door clicked shut behind them, and the room fell silent except for the shallow, rapid breaths of Angela beside him. Jack stood up, his legs shaky but his mind sharp. He walked to the window and pulled back the blinds, scanning the street below. The two men had already disappeared. Angela's voice trembled as she spoke. "Who were they? Are they working for Reed?" Jack shook his head, uncertain. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's someone else entirely. Whoever they are, they don't want me anywhere near this case." Angela stood, her face pale. "They're going to come after me too. They'll know I came to you." Jack moved to her side, trying to maintain his composure. "Listen, you've done the right thing. You've brought me evidence. That's what we need to take Reed down." But Angela shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "You don't get it. These people, they don't leave loose ends." Jack felt a surge of frustration. He was used to fighting in the courtroom, where the threats were legal, not lethal. But this was different. He had crossed a line, and now the danger was more than theoretical. He couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. He turned back to his desk and picked up the flash drive Angela had given him. "This is everything you have?" he asked, more to reassure himself than her. Angela nodded. "Yes. It's all the evidence I managed to copy before I left. I couldn't take anything else without being noticed." Jack slipped the flash drive into his pocket, his mind already working through how he could use this. But the situation had escalated beyond a simple legal battle. Whoever those men were, they made it clear that taking this case any further would mean putting his life on the line. And not just his, Angela's too. "I'll get you protection," Jack said firmly. "You'll be safe. For now, stay low and don't contact anyone until I say it's clear." Angela nodded, clearly shaken, but she didn't argue. As she left, Jack's phone buzzed on his desk. The caller ID read Danielle Larkin. The prosecutor. He picked up. "Morley," her voice came through the line, sharp and direct, as always. "You've just made a very powerful enemy." Jack blinked, surprised. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Jameson Reed. Word is, you've gotten too close to something. I've been hearing things, Jack. Reed's people are mobilizing, and I don't need to remind you that he's not the kind of man you take down easily." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the pressure mounting. "I'm not backing down, Danielle. I can't. Danielle's voice softened, uncharacteristically. Look, I admire your persistence, but Reed is dangerous. He's got connections in high places, places that can shut down an investigation before it even begins. Jack stared out the window, his mind racing. I've got evidence, Danielle. Solid evidence. I hope it's enough, she replied. Because if it's not, you're going to lose more than just this case. You're going to lose everything. The line went dead, leaving Jack in the silence of his office once more. He felt trapped, surrounded by forces he couldn't see but could feel closing in. Reed's reach was longer than he'd imagined, and now it wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about survival. Jack stood there, the weight of the flash drive in his pocket a reminder of the dangerous game he was now playing. He needed a plan, something bigger than just taking this to court. But what that plan was, he wasn't sure yet. As the day wore on, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his office, his home, even his every move, was being watched. He was being hunted, and the hunters were getting closer. He thought about Sarah Reynolds' warning and Angela Hayes' fear. They had both been part of Reed's world, and now they were at risk because of him. Jack sat down at his desk, staring at the piles of case files that suddenly felt irrelevant. This wasn't just a fight for Marcus Layton's freedom anymore. It was a fight to expose the rot that ran deep in the system, a system Reed had manipulated for years. The victory in court earlier that week now felt like a false triumph. Jack had believed he had gained the upper hand, but the reality was much darker. His supposed victory had only scratched the surface, and below it lay a labyrinth of corruption that reached into every corner of the legal and corporate world. Jack reached for the phone, ready to call an old contact in the FBI. If Reed was as connected as everyone claimed, Jack would need more than just legal strategies. He would need allies, powerful ones. But as his finger hovered over the dial, the phone rang on its own. Jack hesitated before answering. "Morley," he said, his voice tense. There was silence on the other end. And then, a familiar voice. Calm. Confident. "Hello, Jack." It was Jameson Reed. Jack's blood ran cold at the sound of Jameson Reed's voice. Calm, steady, and unbothered, like a man who had already won the game before it even began. "Reed," Jack said, gripping the phone tightly. "I suppose it was only a matter of time before you reached out." Reed chuckled lightly, the sound sending a shiver down Jack's spine. "You've been busy, haven't you, Jack? Digging into places where you don't belong. But that's what makes you such an interesting opponent." Jack clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "If you think threatening me is going to work, you're wasting your time." "Threaten you?" Reed's voice remained smooth, almost amused. "No, Jack. I don't need to threaten you. You're already in deep enough. I simply wanted to offer you a way out." Jack leaned back in his chair, anger bubbling under the surface. "I'm not interested in deals with criminals." "Is that what you think this is?" Reed asked, his tone bemused. "A criminal deal? You see, Jack, this is bigger than you and me. Bigger than Marcus Layton or Sarah Reynolds. You've stumbled into something much more complex. And you're in over your head." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "I've seen your operations, Reed. The offshore accounts, the shell companies. I've got enough to expose everything." "Do you?" Reed's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Do you really think you've got enough to bring me down? I admire your courage, Jack, but you have no idea what you're up against." For a moment, Jack hesitated. Reed's confidence was unsettling. He wasn't just a man with money, he was a man with influence. Connections. Power that stretched beyond what Jack had initially imagined. "What do you want, Reed?" Jack finally asked, keeping his voice steady. "I want you to walk away," Reed said simply. "You're a smart man, Jack. You know when to cut your losses. If you walk away now, I'll make sure you're taken care of. A quiet exit. No harm done." "And if I don't?" Jack asked, already knowing the answer. Reed's voice darkened. "If you don't, then you and everyone around you will suffer the consequences. Your reputation, your career, your family, everything will be stripped from you. I have the means to make sure of that." Jack felt his heart race. He knew Reed wasn't bluffing. The man had too many resources, too many people under his control. But Jack couldn't back down now. He had come too far, and he wasn't going to let Reed win so easily. "You can throw all the threats you want, Reed," Jack said, his voice sharp. "But I'm not backing down. You may have your connections, but you're not invincible. I'm going to expose you for the fraud and criminal that you are." Reed sighed, almost disappointed. "I was hoping you'd be more reasonable. But I suppose you've made your choice. Just remember, Jack, you had a way out. You could have walked away. Now, you've chosen the hard path. And it won't end well for you." The line went dead, leaving Jack in silence. He slammed the phone down, his frustration boiling over. He stood up and paced the room, trying to process everything. Reed's warning echoed in his mind, but Jack knew there was no turning back. He had to see this through, no matter the cost. A knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. His assistant poked her head in, looking pale and worried. "Mr. Morley, there's someone here. They say they need to speak with you. Urgently." Jack frowned. "Who is it?" "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "But they don't look like they're here for a friendly visit." Jack's heart sank, the unease from Reed's call still fresh in his mind. "Send them in," he said, bracing himself. The door opened, and in walked a man Jack didn't recognize, tall, wearing a dark suit, his face expressionless. He closed the door behind him and stood in front of Jack's desk, not bothering to introduce himself. "We need to talk, Mr. Morley," the man said in a cold, emotionless tone. Jack didn't sit down, keeping his stance firm. "About what?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black envelope, tossing it onto Jack's desk. "That's your final notice." Jack eyed the envelope but didn't reach for it. "Final notice for what?" The man's eyes were like ice. "You've been warned. Multiple times. Reed doesn't appreciate people who don't listen." Jack felt his blood boil. "So, what? You're here to scare me off? It's not going to work." The man didn't flinch. "You don't understand, Mr. Morley. This isn't a scare tactic. This is a statement. You continue down this path, and everything you care about will be torn apart." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't going to let Reed and his goons intimidate him. "Get out," he said through gritted teeth. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed by Jack's anger. He turned and walked to the door, pausing just before leaving. "You've made your choice. I hope you're ready to live with it." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Jack alone with the black envelope. His pulse raced as he stared at it, debating whether to open it. But he didn't need to. He knew what it contained, another warning, another threat. Jack finally sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. He couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Reed wasn't bluffing. The threats were real, and the danger was closing in. Jack grabbed his phone and dialed Danielle Larkin's number. He needed to loop her in, get the FBI involved, do whatever it took to bring Reed down. But as the line rang, an uneasy thought crossed his mind. What if Reed had already gotten to her too? What if the people around him weren't as trustworthy as they seemed? Danielle answered, her voice sounding tense. "Jack? What's going on?" "I've just had a visit," Jack said, trying to steady his voice. "Reed's making his move. I'm going to need your help." Danielle was silent for a moment. "Are you sure about this? Going after Reed isn't just risky, it's suicide." Jack hesitated. "I don't have a choice anymore." "Then meet me in my office in an hour," she said. "And Jack, be careful." The line went dead again, leaving Jack staring at the phone. The walls were closing in. He had started this fight with Marcus Layton, thinking it was just another case, but now he was up against an unseen force, with enemies lurking in every shadow. He grabbed the black envelope, ripping it open in frustration. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of his family. His wife and daughter, smiling, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Jack's heart stopped. Reed had made it personal. Jack stared at the photo in disbelief, his heart pounding in his chest. His wife, Rachel, and their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, smiling in front of their home, blissfully unaware that their lives were now in danger. He gripped the edges of the photograph, the reality of what he had gotten himself into finally sinking in. Reed wasn't just threatening him anymore. He was threatening his family. For a moment, Jack considered walking away. How could he keep fighting when his family was at risk? But the anger quickly overpowered the fear. Reed was trying to break him, to make him abandon the case. Jack wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He shoved the photograph back into the envelope, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the office. He needed answers, and fast. If Reed was willing to go after his family, things were worse than he'd imagined. The black SUV parked across the street from his office as he left only confirmed what he already knew: he was being watched. The streets of New York blurred as Jack sped toward Danielle Larkin's office. His thoughts raced, calculating his next steps. Exposing Reed was no longer about just winning a case. It was about protecting his family. He wasn't sure how deep the conspiracy ran, but Reed had pushed him too far. When Jack arrived at the courthouse, Danielle was waiting for him in her office, her face tight with concern. She barely looked up from the documents spread across her desk as he entered. "I got your message," Jack said, closing the door behind him. "We need to act now. Reed's already making moves." Danielle looked up, her expression grim. "What happened?" Jack tossed the envelope onto her desk. "That happened." She opened it, her face blanching as she saw the photograph. "Jesus, Jack, this is serious." "Serious?" Jack's voice was raw with frustration. "Reed's threatening my family. He sent someone to my office today, another warning. I'm not sure how long before they do more than just watch us. Danielle put the photo down, running a hand through her hair. You need to get Rachel and Emma out of town. Somewhere safe, far away from this mess. Jack shook his head. I won't hide. That's exactly what Reed wants. I need to take him down before he does something worse. Danielle's eyes narrowed, her voice firm. You're not thinking straight. This isn't just a case anymore. You need to protect your family first. We can gather more evidence, but you can't take on Reed alone. Jack paced the room, his thoughts swirling. Danielle was right, he couldn't do this alone. But the idea of hiding felt like surrender. Every second they wasted gave Reed more time to tighten his grip on the situation. I need your help, Jack said finally. We need to expose Reed before he makes his next move. Danielle hesitated, clearly weighing her options. I'll loop in the FBI. But it'll take time to get them involved at the level we need. Reed has friends in high places. If we're going to make a move, we need airtight evidence. Jack pulled the flash drive Angela Hayes had given him from his pocket. This is the key. Financial records, correspondence, all of it. It connects Reed to the money laundering and offshore accounts. Danielle's eyes lit up with renewed energy as she took the drive. This could work. If we can corroborate it with witness testimony, we might have a case. Angela Hayes worked for Reed, Jack said. She's scared for her life, but she gave me this. If we can get her to testify, it's over for Reed. Danielle nodded, inserting the flash drive into her laptop. I'll start reviewing it. But we need more than just documents. We need a witness willing to testify under oath. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, an unknown number again. His stomach twisted as he answered. Morley. A voice, distorted and unfamiliar, came through the line. You should have listened, Jack. Now it's too late. Jack's heart stopped. Who is this? I told you, Morley. You've made your choice. Now you'll pay the price. The line went dead. Jack's skin prickled with dread. Whoever it was, they were done giving warnings. Danielle noticed his expression change. What is it? They're coming, Jack muttered, his mind racing. We're running out of time. Before Danielle could respond, her office phone rang. She answered, and after a brief exchange, her face paled. It's Angela Hayes, she said, hanging up the phone. She's been found. Dead. Jack's heart sank. He slumped into a chair, the weight of the news crashing over him. Angela was their key witness, the one person who could link Reed directly to the crimes. And now she was gone. How? Jack asked, his voice barely audible. Danielle shook her head, her face etched with disbelief. They're saying it looks like a suicide. But we both know it wasn't. Jack's hands clenched into fists. Reed was erasing the evidence, silencing the witnesses. He had anticipated their every move. Jack felt helpless, the walls closing in. But there had to be something, some piece of the puzzle Reed hadn't anticipated. Without her testimony, we don't have a case, Danielle said, her voice low. It's your word against Reed's, and with his connections, he'll bury you. Jack stood, the tension radiating through him. There's still Marcus Layton. He knows enough to take Reed down. Danielle gave him a skeptical look. Marcus is unreliable. He's been lying to you from the beginning. Jack rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure building. Maybe. But he's the only chance we've got left. Danielle looked at him, her expression softening. Jack, listen to me. You can't take this on alone. Get your family to safety. Let me handle the rest. But Jack couldn't think of safety now. He could only think of how deep Reed's claws had dug into his life. Into everything. The time for caution had passed. He was going to confront Marcus one more time, but this time, he would make sure to get the truth, no matter the cost. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, ignoring Danielle's protests. Don't do anything stupid, Jack, she called after him. But Jack had already made up his mind. The final pieces were falling into place, and he was running out of time. He needed answers, and he knew where to get them. Marcus Layton might be the key to taking down Reed, but Jack knew one thing for certain: in this game, everyone was playing for their own survival. And betrayal was just a move away. As Jack rushed out of the courthouse, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Rachel. Jack, I'm scared, her voice trembled on the other end. There's a car parked outside the house. I don't know who it is, but they've been there all day. Jack's blood froze. Reed had finally come for his family. I'm coming, Rachel, Jack said, his voice tight with urgency. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be there soon. He hung up, the dread in his chest rising like a tide. The clock was ticking, and Jack was running out of moves. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he sped through the streets, his heart hammering in his chest. His mind raced through everything that had happened, every threat, every lie, every piece of evidence that now felt useless. The car tailing Rachel was a reminder that Reed had crossed the line. And now Jack was out of time. He arrived at his house, the familiar neighborhood shrouded in a sinister air. As he turned the corner, his eyes locked onto the black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and Jack couldn't see who was inside, but he knew it wasn't friendly. Jack parked down the block and got out, keeping his eyes on the SUV as he made his way to the house. His phone buzzed. Rachel. Jack? Her voice was small, afraid. I'm here, he whispered. Stay away from the windows. Lock the doors. He hung up and approached the front door, his muscles tensing. The SUV remained motionless, its presence a quiet threat. Jack slipped inside the house, locking the door behind him. Rachel rushed down the stairs, her face pale with fear, and Emma peeked out from behind her mother, her wide eyes filled with confusion. Jack, what's going on? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Who are those people? Jack knelt down, pulling Emma into his arms, his heart aching as she clung to him. It's going to be okay, he whispered, though he didn't believe it. I'll keep you both safe. He stood, meeting Rachel's eyes. We need to leave. Now. Pack only what's necessary. Rachel nodded, fear flashing in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She hurried upstairs to gather a few things, leaving Jack with Emma. He tried to smile at his daughter, but his mind was racing. The SUV hadn't moved, but it was only a matter of time. Just as Rachel returned, Jack's phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. Jack's stomach twisted, but he answered. Morley, came the familiar, cold voice of Jameson Reed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Jack gritted his teeth. You think scaring my family is going to make me stop? Reed chuckled softly. I warned you, Jack. I gave you a way out, but you insisted on making this personal. Now, it's personal for both of us. Jack felt his hands shaking, but he forced himself to stay calm. I'm not walking away, Reed. This ends with you. Reed's voice remained calm, unnerving. You still think you can win? You've lost everything, Jack. Angela Hayes is dead, Marcus Layton is a lying snake, and soon, you'll have nothing left. But I'll give you one last chance, hand over what you have. Stop digging, and maybe your family will be left alone. Jack's blood boiled. You're not touching them. You can't protect them forever, Reed said, his voice dripping with certainty. You're out of options. Jack glanced out the window. The SUV remained parked, but something in the air had changed. A man stepped out of the vehicle, his movements deliberate and slow. Jack's chest tightened as he watched the man lean against the car, as if waiting. I'll see you soon, Jack, Reed said before the line went dead. Jack's body surged with adrenaline. He knew Reed wasn't bluffing. He grabbed Rachel's hand and led her and Emma to the back door. We need to go. Now. Rachel hesitated. Where will we go? Jack glanced out the window again. The man was still waiting, watching the house. We'll go to a hotel, somewhere safe. I'll call Danielle. She'll help us. But as they moved toward the back, the doorbell rang, freezing Jack in his tracks. He turned toward the front door, dread settling over him. Stay here, Jack whispered to Rachel, then crept toward the door, his heart pounding in his ears. Peering through the peephole, Jack saw Marcus Layton standing on the porch, looking ragged and desperate. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Marcus wasn't supposed to know where he lived. How did he find him? Jack cracked the door open just enough to speak. Marcus? What the hell are you doing here? Marcus's eyes were wild, his voice frantic. Jack, they're coming for me. Reed's people, I don't have much time. Jack opened the door wider, keeping one eye on the street. What are you talking about? You lied to me. You've been in on this from the start. Marcus shook his head violently. No, I didn't lie about everything. I did work for Reed, but I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late. I tried to walk away, but they framed me, just like I said. Jack's anger flared, but before he could respond, Marcus shoved a file into his hands. This is it, Jack. It's everything you need to take Reed down. Bank statements, wire transfers, names. All of it. I was keeping it as leverage, but now they're after me. You're my last chance. Jack hesitated, his mind spinning. Could Marcus be telling the truth? After all the lies and manipulation, was this finally the missing piece of the puzzle? A loud crash from the front of the house made them both jump. Jack spun around just in time to see the black SUV speed off down the street. Glass from a broken window scattered across the floor. The message was clear, there was no more time. Reed's people had sent their final warning. We need to get out of here, Jack said, his voice tight. Now. Rachel rushed down the hall, holding Emma close. Jack, what's happening? We'll explain later, Jack said, grabbing their bags. We need to go somewhere safe. The four of them piled into Jack's car, his mind racing as he pulled away from the house. He didn't know where they could go that Reed's people wouldn't find them, but he knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. Marcus clutched the file tightly in the back seat, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting to be taken out at any moment. As they drove through the night, Jack's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Danielle. "Jack, where are you?" she asked, her voice urgent. "On the move. Reed's people are after us. Marcus just showed up, he's got proof." Danielle paused. "Jack, listen to me. Reed's already making moves. I just got word, the FBI is in on this now. They've been investigating Reed's operation for months, and they've finally decided to act. They want your help." Jack felt a flicker of hope. "What do I need to do?" "Bring Marcus in," Danielle said. "With his testimony and the evidence, we can take Reed down. But you have to get to a safe location first." Jack nodded, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "We'll be there." As Jack drove into the darkness, the weight of the moment settled over him. It wasn't over yet. Reed was still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. But Jack had something Reed didn't count on, a way out, and a chance to expose the truth. He just had to survive long enough to see it through. The next morning, Jack arrived at the designated meeting point with Danielle and the FBI. Marcus, his hands trembling, handed over the evidence, his fate now intertwined with Jack's. As the agent sifted through the files, Danielle approached Jack, her expression grim. "It's enough," she said. "Reed's finished." Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But even as relief washed over him, he knew the victory came with a price. Angela Hayes was dead, his family had been terrorized, and the shadow of corruption had nearly consumed everything. Reed would go down, but Jack knew there were others who would rise to take his place. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. As Jack stood with Rachel and Emma, watching the FBI prepare to bring Reed in, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the choices he had made. He had survived, but at what cost? Reed was right about one thing. This had become personal. And in the world Jack lived in, nothing was ever truly safe. In the end, Jack discovered that in the battle for power, justice might just be an illusion. He faced an enemy who controlled not only the system but the lives around him, revealing that truth is malleable in the hands of those with influence. Reed played by his own rules, and victory didn't depend on who was right, but on who had control. The real question here is, to what extent can we trust a system corrupted by those at the top? Does justice truly exist for everyone, or is it just a game of power? Share your thoughts. Do you still think fighting for justice is worth it? And of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories where right and wrong get blurred.